The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. On today's show, I've got Don Bellamy, who is an experienced life sciences exec. He's worked at some big pharmaceutical companies such as Novatis and AstraZeneca, and most recently spent some time at Canopy Growth, which is the biggest cannabis company in the world. Don's got some great perspectives coming from the background of big Pharma, but also big Canna, and has a great understanding of the regulatory framework and what needs to happen next. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to him. Welcome, Don.
Hi, how are you, Anuj?
Very good, very good. Thanks for joining us. Cool. So, I mean, look, there's some great stuff on your CV and loads to get into, but as is traditional, why don't we start a bit about your background and how you got into the cannabis industry?
Right. Well, I guess I would say now, I've been 27 years in the healthcare industry. I used to say the pharma industry because I would say 24 of those years were in pharma. I was excited by it. Being an economics graduate, I was excited by it because it seemed to add something different. Not just was it having a great career in an industry, but it was doing the right thing for patients. And I discovered I really liked that, and that motivated me. So as my career developed in pharma, I worked for the big companies that you mentioned, all over the world, all sorts of different roles. But over time, I started to feel that it just wasn't as much fun as it used to be. The growth rates weren't there. The innovation wasn't necessarily there. People were getting very risk averse. They were cost cutting all over the place. And it just wasn't the focus that I had originally wanted to find, right? So I started to think, well, how do I return to those moments of excitement, right? And my first move was towards smaller pharma, biotechs, and I did find them more fast moving. And then in that search, I was contacted by Canopy Growth, and I was proposed an adventure into cannabis. And to me, it was an adventure because at the start, I guess I was an ordinary citizen who knew what we knew from the street about cannabis, but I didn't really consider it to be serious at the time. I obviously did some research. I obviously started to get more and more interested in the whole thing. And to cut a long story short, I became very convinced that not only was there a serious healthcare job to be done in this industry, but there was an opportunity to really help patients. So that's what got me into the industry, and it's two and a bit years ago. And I'm still very interested to stay here. I think there's a lot to be done. We are at a interesting moment of formation of the industry, right? And I think I would have a lot to offer as we move forwards.
Yeah. I mean, that's great that you're quite honest about the fact that you come from a very traditional industry and that's very kind of built and sophisticated and grown up, and then something must have piqued your interest at least to take the call, and sort of then, you clearly followed up on that by taking the role at Canopy.
Yeah, I think there's two elements to that, right? First of all, there's kind of the business element. I was very excited about something that was at a very early stage, very entrepreneurial, transforming every day. As an economics guy, it was very interesting to be back in that sort of environment. But as I said to you, there's always the healthcare angle for me. My priority is whatever I do to try and do it for the good of the patient. Mm-hmm. And when I started to read some of the promise that exists with cannabis being used as a serious medicine, when I started to read about everything that still needs to be done, that to me is tremendous opportunity, and that got me really excited.
Yeah, that's great. Opportunity is one of my favourite words when it comes to cannabis.
That's absolutely right.
So, yeah, I mean, look, it'd be hard to not talk about it. What was it like being at the epicentre of the legal cannabis industry?
At Canopy.
Yeah, at Canopy.
So I spent the majority of 2018 there. I was actually based in Canada. Mm-hmm. it was, I think looking back, it was a fantastic education on the global market, right? So there are very few truly global cannabis companies, right? And Canopy is one of them. So it allowed me to learn about what was going on in North America, what was going on in other parts of the world, Europe for sure, but Asia, Africa, Latin America, everybody's doing it in a slightly different way, right? And to get that global perspective, I think is very valuable and very unique, because I can compare and contrast in ways in which people don't do normally, right? So in terms of a school to learn your trade and to understand just how much there is to be done in cannabis, it was a great start. You know? Obviously, I was there when a huge injection of capital came from Constellation, and that really changed things at Canopy, I think. I was also there when recreational legalization happened in Canada, which was a transformative moment in that particular market. So it was a great starting point into the industry for sure. And now that I'm back in Europe and the perspective is a little bit different, I think I have a view about things that were being done really well and things that maybe need a slightly different angle on. And that's what I hope I can contribute to.
Yeah. And with your experience there and now coming back over to Europe, how far behind do you think we are in the UK and Europe?
In very, very broad terms, the North Americans are a bit more relaxed about regulation and a bit more liberal about their willingness to have it used in a more wellness, recreational environment. That's not true to every US state, but what I've just said there covers Canada and the majority now of US states. Whereas in Europe, there is a concern which is born out of the European way of thinking of these things, which is this has to be understood, this has to be regulated, there have to be standards, and this, that, and the other. And I fully understand that, by the way. You know, let's not forget I spent 27 years in pharmaceuticals, so I know exactly, I understand the drive, let's put it that way, to want to regulate and want to ensure standards and this, that, and the other. So I guess in very broad terms, these are differences, right? But you certainly thinking back towards Canada, because it was a little bit more available, it was a little bit more accepted in society, this, that, and the other. You probably have more physicians, more doctors in Canada who are willing to give it a go, who by doing so have discovered things that they believe is true about the way cannabis should be used and so on. So there's more of a, let's call it, active, almost underground, but active debate going on about how cannabis should be used to treat patients, right? And I see that less in Europe because, you know, the doctors willing to stand up, the doctors who are using it are very, very few. The ones who are willing to stand up and actually say they're doing it are even fewer. And the ones who have real experience to be able to share with their colleagues are fewer still. So in that sense, you could say Europe is far behind. But I'll just end up by saying I defend the need for regulation, standards, quality, whatever. And I actually think all North American producers could learn significantly from having to meet higher standards, which Europe is going to impose for sure. It's a question of how stringent it's going to be and how long is it going to take.
Yeah, really interesting perspectives there. That's certainly the way, my impression was North Americans are more attuned to recreational and wellness as part of the whole piece, whereas in Europe or certainly in the UK, in my experience, everyone's sort of petrified of recreational or anyone having fun with cannabis or enjoying it. It's very much focused on the medical side and a highly regulated path. I think in order to sort of secure legitimacy and overcome stigma, but there's probably a number of reasons. I think regulation is definitely a good thing, though.
Yeah, and you have to create the environment where all of these things can move forwards, right? You have to create an environment where the medical community is generating data for this to look like something that has to be done. At the same time that regulators are seeing clarity about what to do, and they can only see clarity in conjunction with the different players. You know, I don't want to lecture to people who know all about this, but in the pharma world, good regulation never happens unless it's done in consultation with the industry, with society, with advisory groups, with pressure groups, with patient groups. And it's only when you get these different perspectives and you are willing to hear these different perspectives that something emerges that everybody can live with, right? And that's not there yet. But Anuj, I think something else to say is maybe I should just kind of put my cards on the table so that people understand. You know, I don't have a problem at all with the recreational use of cannabis, okay? What I feel is that people have rushed to jump into this before knowing what the limits are. You know, if somebody is going to go and drink enormous amounts of alcohol, there is a certain understanding about how much is too much, right? What the consequences are of taking too much, right? How you can avoid, adjust it, you know, whatever, and what the risks are about other things like driving a car. You know, I'm just giving a simple example to say that what I would prefer to have happened is I would prefer things to have started from the medical side of things with a good understanding of what this plant can do and what it can't do and what the effects are, long-term effects, high dose, mixing it, CBD, THC, what's the right balance, you know, all of these different things, right? And once we have this within this kind of envelope of knowledge, saying, okay, it can also be used for wellness and it can certainly be used for people enjoying themselves, but this is how you can do it in a way which isn't going to do significant damage. Society and regulators are calling out for data, physicians as well, right? But they're not exactly creating the environment where it is possible to go out and get data, right? Generating data is an expensive process. You've got to understand that the majority of this industry is startup, strapped for cash, right? It is very difficult for a small company that has no experience in this to be expected to go out and generate massive amounts of data so that people can use, right? Plus, there is the issue of protection of the data that you generate. You have to understand that in a commercial open market, if you are going to invest lots of money trying to generate data and this data is not protected, then what you've done is you've spent the money and everybody else can use it, right? These are reasons why the search for answers, the search for data, isn't moving as fast as it should do in the cannabis world. And to me, the missing part there is if regulators, if university, if society wants data to come out, they have to help.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this leads nicely on to my next question. We had Greg Orrs on a few weeks ago. He's a medical cannabis educator and just talking about the nature of Western medicine and how it's quite difficult to fit cannabis into that model. And we talked about big pharma and how generally a lot of the data, as you talk about, is generated from research commissioned by big pharmaceutical companies. And obviously that's not happening as much as probably we'd like. What's your view, from having spent a lot of time in that industry, on the challenges that cannabis poses to pharmaceutical companies?
I think in very simple terms, big pharma is unsure about whether cannabis is a friend or foe. Big pharma has the power, if it chose to step in and to step in big, right? And the fact that it hasn't done it yet is an indication that they're not sure. There are some wonderful things that you could imagine with associating cannabis with other pharmaceutical compounds which exist already as a way to try and create, you know, we talk about the entourage effect within cannabis, but I suspect, and I don't have the right evidence to make a claim here, but I suspect that, for example, a combination product of some mix of cannabinoids and an opiate might be a really significant way to reduce the opiate load on people, right? And I can imagine this being a really interesting product, which a big company, be it a big Canna company or a big pharma company, might want to develop. And the reason it doesn't is because it's like stepping over the boundary. You know, it's like it doesn't feel serious to pharma to have elements of a plant in something that they've invented themselves, right? Now, with more data...
The opiates are elements of a plant, aren't they?
Well, they are, absolutely. They are absolutely. So they can be convinced, right? They can be convinced, and they might be. But going back to the cannabis business, the cannabis industry is the one that should know best about what its product does, right? And it doesn't at this moment, right? So there is tremendous opportunity in society. So, for example, things that I saw in Canada, and so we can go back to the point of it being a little bit more developed there. The opportunity to use cannabinoids in tertiary care, in care homes and this, that and the other, is huge. It turns out, and this surprised me, it turns out that old people in a care home respond really, really well to low-dose cannabinoids. Good. They just feel generally happier. They feel more energized, they socialize better, on top of the fact that it helps them with pain and all sorts of stuff. They sleep better. It's just easier. The care home managers adore having a little bit of cannabis in the environment because it just makes everything better, easier.
We talked a bit about regulation. What do you think needs to happen next in general, or maybe a brief summary on where you think we are right now and then what needs to happen next?
Well, if we think more about Europe, there is the start of regulation happening in several EU markets and in the UK as well. And it tends to be going towards the more conservative. But what I don't think is happening is an open discussion and debate with all the key players that I told you about what is the right way to do it. And I do have to say that I sometimes find the cannabis industry a little bit schizophrenic on this, because depending on who you speak with, some people seem to be completely against regulation. You know, what they want is they want a free market, they want to do what they think they should do, they don't want to be hampered by the regulator, just let us be sort of thing. And they're willing to compromise on everything to get to that. So the way they get to a free flow market is saying, listen, I promise I'm not going to make any claims. I promise I'm not going to do anything that will compromise the standards, but you're not really going to be able to check my quality. And as long as I do that, you don't overburden me with regulation and everything will be fine. I don't actually think that's the right way. I think the right way is, let's accept there has to be regulation. Let's accept that standards should be the highest. Why shouldn't they be the highest? They should be the highest, right? And if I, as a player in this market, am a little bit concerned about my ability to meet those standards, well, that's up to me to do something about it. And if I can engage with the regulator and help them create something, I will not only gain visibility about what's coming down the road, but I'll have time to prepare for it, right? And at the end of the day, this is my view on regulation, it kind of creates open space for you. You know, if you've set up walls around your house, which are quite high, but you're inside, you know, you've got an opportunity to play safely inside of your house, knowing that the walls are there, they're protecting you, and you're not going to have loads of people jumping over, right? So that's the way it should happen. And what you have in Europe is you still don't have the emergence of one common view about how to regulate. If you look about how things are happening in the UK, how things started off in the Netherlands, how things are being regulated in Germany, they're all slightly different approaches, right? And then the European Commission says it's going to talk about it all, but there isn't a power to bring it all together. I think things would be a lot easier if there was one discussion going on, and the way to regulate, let's call it the European way to regulate, was emerging in a more clear way.
I mean, harmonisation obviously is a key topic for a lot of people in a lot of areas, not just cannabis. But I imagine in the same sort of thing in the US, they're very far from harmonised.
Yeah, they have no idea.
Given it's on a state level. Again, it signifies a lot of opportunity because it's just messy, basically. I mean, I would say that I've done some work with the CMC recently, who are just launching a new self-regulating body, and they've been very active in engaging with the regulator on the cannabinoid side, so the FSA. And from my understanding, the regulator is quite kind of pleased to hear from them because they don't have the skill set or the infrastructure internally to fully understand this. So it seems to be a nice example of where the regulator is working with the industry in a nice way to kind of develop very high standards, actually. And the guys that have set up the ACI, the Association for the Cannabinoid Industry, were saying they speak to some of their American members and they're really impressed and they sort of crave this level of standards, basically.
Yeah. Well, listen, regulators need help. I've learnt that over many, many years in healthcare. Regulators can't do it alone. And if you try and let them do it alone, if you close them up in a room and say, come up with some laws, what they will come up with isn't going to be practical, useful, helpful to anyone. And it's not their fault, right? Yeah. It's our fault. Yeah. So what we need an open, transparent discussion about what do we want to do about this. How do we ensure that we advance the possible field of use of this on a medical side, and how do we ensure that we guarantee the highest qualities of production, and how do we guarantee that this gets used in a more wellness, well-being setting in ways in which society is going to generally be better for it. Okay? That's a very broad opening statement, and let's hear you. Let's hear your different opinions, and let's get together and let's come out with something that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's great. So, just a final bit on that. Obviously, NICE delivered their report in relation to medical cannabis in the UK. What was your impression of that? Because I'm not sure how much they did engage with the industry in coming up with that report.
Yeah. I don't think they engaged at all with the industry. I think they generated their view based on what they heard from a very, very small number of physicians who had, I have to say, limited experience in what they were saying. And essentially, but it is a very normal first position for NICE. NICE normally starts off by saying, there's not enough evidence, you need to give me some more, right? Mm-hmm. And this happens in all areas of pharmaceuticals until eventually, not every drug, but eventually drugs generate sufficient evidence to convince NICE that, maybe, right? But this is overwhelming. If you bring this body of evidence together, right, and you show real... And by the way, I'm sorry to be cynical here, but the moment that you start to have a really powerful economic argument for using cannabis in some corner of the medical world, on top of the health benefits which you're already working to claim, things become a lot easier in the European context. European healthcare systems are all cash-strapped. They're all social healthcare systems. It is a major economic decision to add something new which has the potential to be used widely, right? So gatekeepers like NICE, and there are different ones around Europe as well, but NICE, which is very respected, is a really important gatekeeper to get through. And I would think that it should be possible with a well-planned series of studies, within 2 to 3 years to come back to NICE with overwhelming evidence about what this can do in terms of savings into the system and in terms of health benefits for patients.
And who do you think should fund that?
Good question. There are two or three different ways that you could think of that. You could think of a company with some kind of proprietary product, someone like GW, wanting to do that because they feel they have the defense of the proprietary that they are keeping, the proprietary interest that they have. Or you could think of some kind of association, collaboration with universities, with the industry in general, to try and generate data which is available to everyone. I think there could easily be a public-private partnership of some kind built up, to advance research. As I've said, I think that's the only way that you're going to get major engagement. But then if you get it that way, what you're getting is just like, let's call it generic data, which can be used by anyone.
Okay, so we're getting towards the end now. If you were able to, can you cherry pick bits of regulation that's working across the world?
The Dutch have a way of ensuring the strictest quality for their medical product, right? They have done it through through a monopoly position, right? They've taken one supplier and they've said, you are going to give me this cannabis of this standard, this quality, and I am going to distribute it around the place. So I like the guarantee of quality there. Okay, I think that's very good. In Canada, I like the willingness of society, of physicians, and ultimately of the regulator, Health Canada there, to accept population data, real world data, and to use that as a way to eventually show safety and all that stuff. Because, when something is out in the public already, it's very hard to hold it back, and people struggle to give you clinical trial stuff when it's just out there, So if you're a bit more flexible and you're willing to accept real world data, it might not have the rigor of a clinical trial, but it involves many, many hundreds of patients, right? It can be powerful. So I think that's really good as well. The UK, and this is not a particular comment about cannabis, but the UK always puts a really strong angle on health economics. In other words, you've got to show me not only that something is good for my patients, but it's value for money, right? And the UK has the highest standards and the highest expertise in measuring that. So that's a great way to get over everybody's health economic hurdles. If you can get over the hurdle in the UK, not only do other people just respect it because it's just such a well-known organization around the world, but you've basically generated pretty much the data that you need to win that argument in several other places, right? And I think in Germany they have a more open market view to things. I like the way in Germany in which health insurers have been brought into the market. Okay, they've been a little bit forced into the market, but they're there, right? So many people can now not only get a cannabis script in Germany, but they can get health insurance for it too, and that's tremendous as well. So there you go. There's a few examples around the world of things that I think are happening well, but as with everything in cannabis, everything is kind of country by country. There's not so much debate going on. Things are emerging at different rates, and it would be better to see this sort of better organized.
Yeah, of course. But that's, I suppose, the stage that we're at. What I really liked from what you talked about is I think I talk about it a bit. I think we kind of need to look at a new framework for evaluating medicine when it comes to cannabis, because it doesn't fit so neatly into that clinical trial, double-blind placebo type world. Yeah. And I think from talking to guests like yourself, the resistance from a lot of doctors is that's the only bar that they really understand. Yeah,
and that's a problem, Yeah. That is a real problem.
I understand the pharmaceutical model. You're trying to isolate one, maybe two compounds to a very high, consistent degree, and then synthesize those. So that kind of model probably lends itself to that aim. But ultimately, pharmaceutical drugs get passed as safe with known side effects. So it's not like that process is producing something that's perfect without...
Well, the regulator doesn't say, I don't expect you to submit a perfect drug, but I do expect you to know what it does and to know what the side effects are and to know how to avoid it and what patient groups are particularly at risk, right? And if you don't tell me these things, I get very nervous, right? Okay. That's fair, isn't it? Think about us as normal patients going to the doctor. The doctor prescribes something to you, and the doctor has no idea, how much you should take for how long you should take it. That would make you nervous as a normal citizen. So that's what we need to get to, right? And going back to metadata, the purists can say whatever they want about it's not real science. But if you find 2,000, 3,000 data points of patients who have been on a whole variety of different cannabinoids, some in clinical trials, some in society, whatever, and you bring it together and you form a view that there is a correlation between this sort of dose or this sort of THC CBD mix being effective in this sort of indication, right? That's data. You can't say it's not data. It's data, and it's better than what we have, right? And it's powerful because it's real world, right? And it's the reality of what has happened. And I'm not a physician, but if I was, I would be very, very grateful to receive that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's hope that movement progresses. It's been great having you on the show. I would like to end with my traditional last question, which is, what did your family say when you told them you were going to get into the world of weed?
The world of weed. Well, my mum and dad, unfortunately, are not around to give an opinion, but my wife was very excited, especially when I explained to her what I said at the start of this podcast, why I was doing it. And I showed her, a few videos and a few bits of evidence of what this can do. It didn't take long to convince my wife. She's all in favour. My son, who's a 19-year-old student, is all in favour for slightly different reasons. But we'll get into that later, I think.
Oh, that's great. That's good. It's always nice when it's a happy story and warmly welcomed, so I'm glad. Don, look, this is brilliant, and like I said, we could have probably talked for at least another hour, so I'm sure we could get you on the show next year.
Fantastic.
To come and give us an update, because things are happening all the time in this
Things
space.
are happening all the time. It's been a real pleasure. Okay?
Likewise, thank you.
All right.